So today we have with us one of our staff council representatives, Alex Macmillan. Alex is the CU Boulder farm manager, and he is a wealth of information. So if you were here with us last time, he shared a lot of great information on how to get your garden started and then answered a ton of questions. So today we're going to do a follow-on on that. Like I mentioned, if you were unable to attend last time, we have a recording on our website. I will post the link in the chat. Just a reminder, everybody, once you've joined, you've been automatically muted. We are expecting quite a few people here in the session today, so we want to make sure that everybody can hear Alex throughout the session. So please keep yourself muted. If you have a question, feel free to type it into the chat. I'm going to be monitoring the questions while we go through the session, and we'll save room at the end of the session for the questions. So feel free to ask questions while Alex is going through his presentation, and then I'll save them all for the end and ask them once he's wrapped up with his presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it to Alex. Thanks for being here with us.
Thanks for that introduction. So before we get into the presentation, my name is Alex Millan. I'm the farm manager here at CU Boulder. I've been here going on 4 years. For those who aren't familiar with what I do, I did want to share a little video that kind of explains what I do, and it's a good little introduction. So without further ado.
My name is Alex Macmillan, and I'm the farm manager over here at the Village Center. This is my office, and it's pretty awesome. When I get in the morning, one of the first things I'll do is just walk the greenhouse and make sure, does the greenhouse feel right? Is everything running appropriately? Are the crops looking okay? I don't have anything wilting, making sure that everybody's happy. Here at the Village Center greenhouse, we do things a little bit differently than we would at a normal greenhouse. We're right next to the dining center, which gives us the ability to take produce from the farm and literally walk it over to the salad bar. It doesn't get much healthier and fresh than this unless you're living on a farm. There are a lot of great sustainability features here at the new greenhouse. One is we're using aeroponic towers, which recirculates the water so we can serve water, and we're actually using less water than we would to grow lettuce in the field. Another great feature of this greenhouse is how much carbon we're reducing on the roads and in the environment. In your traditional greenhouse, you're running tractors, you're running transportation equipment to get the product to its final destination, and here we're walking it. I'd like to think that this will have an impact on the future of how large establishments produce their own food. I've never been in an establishment where the produce gets consumed and is made within feet of each other. It's kind of unheard of, and I think it's awesome. This greenhouse is equipped with the latest and greatest technology. We use an Argus Titan climate controller, which gives us the ability to monitor the environment not only in our greenhouse, but outside as well. The computer then takes all that data in real time and uses logic-based algorithms to then predict and change the growing conditions in here by turning on the fans or turning on our swamp coolers. It does this in steps that help save us energy and make us greener in the process. As a grower, it really frees up my time to not have to worry about the growing conditions, knowing that my system is going to take care of it. And even if it does go out of whack, it's going to send me alerts on my phone so that I know that there's something wrong with the greenhouse and I can immediately address that problem. Here at the CU greenhouse, we're able to produce more lettuce in the same square footage than we would being able to grow traditionally in a soil or field setting. It's kind of like a forest full of vegetables in here. In the future, we plan on having students be involved in this process, whether that be helping harvesting or helping seeding. We think that this is an opportunity for the students to really be involved in not only the community, but the food process itself, which is something that is new here at CU Boulder. When people see the greenhouse, I hope that they get inspired to not only connect with me, their local farmer, but to really connect with their food, because so much of our food is just bought at the supermarket, and unfortunately not a lot of people know the hard work and the time that goes into producing their food. So to be able to show that to someone who's never been on a farm, I think for me that's where I hope to inspire people to really care about, where their food comes and what they're putting into their body. This job is important to me just simply because I love growing. It's what I've meant to do. I've got 2 green thumbs, and this is where I'm going to be putting them to work.
So that's a little bit about me. Let me share my screen. There we go. All right. So today we're going to be talking about steps that you can take to kind of take your gardening to the next level. And by that, we're going to look at sort of methods that we employ traditionally and kind of look at how those methods might give us desirable results or undesirable results, and kind of look at small changes that we can make in our habits when gardening that will actually pay dividends and result in more crops or a more flourishing garden. So this is my contact information. There were requests before about tours of the greenhouse, and I did kind of want to address that right now. The greenhouse is currently closed with COVID, and we hope to be online sometime in the fall. So if you are interested in a tour of the greenhouse, it's something we still offer. We're just not in the capacity to offer those right now. So please keep my information and reach out to me in the fall, and I'd be happy to follow up and hopefully get you on a tour of the greenhouse, because we love having people inside. It's a really cool place to be. Right before everything shut down, we were harvesting roughly 100 pounds a week. So that was a continuous cycle. Things are always at different stages, and that's one of the scheduling techniques that we use here at the greenhouse to make sure that there's always a crop. If you've driven by the greenhouse, you might have noticed the big purple glow coming off the roof at night. We use LED lights in here, and those consist of red and blue diodes. So together, it gives a purple glow. Interesting fact, we actually wear special glasses when the lights are on. It will dye and saturate our cones so that when we come out for about a couple minutes, there's a green tint to anything. So it's quite bright in there. But if you're ever wondering what's going on in there, that's what it is. So today's talk, we're going to talk a lot about watering, and we're going to talk a lot about bugs, because those seem to be 2 of kind of the main factors that will really help you. If you can control these, it's going to pay dividends in your garden. So when we're talking about watering, we're talking about getting water and nutrients to the plant. And there really isn't a right or wrong way to do it, but there are certain ways that we can irrigate a plant that will take the potential of diseases or fungus, and we can lower those. You can see in the picture here that they're watering at the base of the plant, and that will kind of be the gist of what I'm going to get at today. But we're going to go over why it's important to, instead of watering over the head and getting the plant wet, why we might want to aim to water the plant at the base. And there's a couple different methods we can use to get to this point. Now, why is this important? So if you are familiar with the picture on the right, that's powdery mildew. And unfortunately in Colorado, it's something that we get. So when we're watering overhead, oftentimes it's causing droplets to splash off the plant. These little droplets can spread the spores of the fungus or the bacteria to other plants. And this can happen oftentimes at a stage where we don't visually see the disease or the fungus. So what's important is by watering at the base of the plant and not doing it overhead, we're kind of avoiding that whole problem right there. And if you've had powdery mildew, you know it can get pretty aggressive pretty quickly. So this watering technique can kind of be seen as more of a preventative measure rather than a curative, because an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And this is definitely true when we're talking about especially aggressive fungal diseases like powdery mildews. So we see here a typical overhead watering. this is kind of how it is in nature, but in nature there is a lot of fungal disease and pressure. So just by kind of getting it at the base of the plant, we're going to be more successful long term. We're not giving the plant those microclimates where those fungal disease and spores are gonna spread. So how do we want to water it? I definitely recommend using a wand. It's a simple little thing that can make a huge difference just by getting it actually at the base of the plant. We're avoiding creating that microclimate. And then we're also not spreading things around. So really simple, if we can get into the habit of watering at the base of the plant, that's preferred. There's also multiple methods. It's not just using a wand. There's soaker hoses, put it on drip irrigation. Just generally, we want to avoid getting the plant wet. The other thing to kind of keep in mind is if you are using a hose or something, to try to keep that off the ground when it's not in use. So soil pathogens originate in the soils. So by keeping it off the ground and not where those spores will be, we can kind of prevent to a certain degree an amount of disease spread in our garden. So if you are looking to get a wand, I really recommend the Dram One Touch wand. It's what I use here in the garden. I've been using it for 2.5 years and it works like new. So we use it daily. So if you are looking to kind of invest in some gardening tools, not all valves are created equal, unfortunately, but the Dram ones will last the test of time. And I definitely recommend them if you're looking into upgrading your watering equipment. The Dram One Touch is definitely to be considered. And it's not too bad. It's about 30 to 45, depending on the length of the wand and the nozzle that you're choosing. So the other factors that water can cause or attribute to is if we're doing too much or not enough. And really with watering, it's not the easiest subject. I really wished in college that there was just a class called Watering 101, because it took me a little while after I got my degree to really figure out, how do we water a plant? How do you know that the plant is getting either enough or not enough? And we can kind of look to the symptoms. So if we're overwatering it, we're going to get poor root development, and that's going to lead to things like Pythium and Rhizoctonia, which are soil-borne diseases, and they attack the roots. So if you've ever taken a plant off and the roots feel like they have almost like you can imagine an onion ring where there's that sheath of the breading underneath the onion. Those are that's a Pythium, and that is a soil-borne disease. And often it's because of there's too much water and not enough gas exchange to promote the healthy white roots that we want to see. So on the flip side, too little water and we leave our plants open to pests and diseases. The one thing I will say is I do feel that it is appropriate to wilt a plant. Obviously, you don't want to wilt an African violet or something that needs to be in a higher water setting. But if we allow that plant to have a light wilt, we're building that plant's immune system up and conditioning it to situations where, maybe you were gone for the weekend and you didn't have time to water before. So if we wilt that plant preemptively, we're actually conditioning the plant to be stronger versus if you keep it watered how it wants to be all the time, you're doing a great job, but you're not doing the plant the benefit of learning how to cope with those dry down periods. So it is that balance that we're looking for. One tip that I'll give you guys is look at the weight. If you're using the container and can physically pick up the container, check out the weights, because that will help guide you into knowing that this is dry and needs water, or this has enough water for a couple of days. It's something you can kind of play with, and it'll take a little while, but it'll definitely be worth the effort. So while we're talking about water, we also want to talk about fertilizer. Oftentimes I see the home consumer really not fertilizing enough. And there's a couple ways we can do this. One of my favorites is using synthetic fertilizer. It's easy, it's clean, and it works really well. It's easy to mix up. I realize that's not everyone's cup of tea. If you're organic and you're amending your soil, I would recommend some sort of liquid fertilization, whether that be a bat guano product or a fish emulsion product. With organics, we do want to make sure that we're not running it too hot or have too much nutrients in it that are actually going to, you can have too many nutrients in the plant and you'll end up with burnt leaves. So it's definitely a good idea to keep an eye on the visual symptoms. As far as what to look for to know that, yes, my plant is hungry or it will like water, is we're going to be looking at the mature leaves of the plant. So if the recently mature leaves are starting to turn yellow, that's the telltale sign of nitrogen deficiency. So nitrogen is a mobile element in a plant. So it will, the plant can actually take it from older mature leaves and move that up to the plant to the top where it needs that continuous supply of nitrogen in order to fuel the growth. So that's what you're going to look for. And it's not going to be a bright yellow. You'll see a slight yellow around the tips, and then it will kind of encompass the outer leaves filling in. If you see that happening, don't be afraid to get some fertilizer out. There are a lot of options out there. One option to consider if you're considering the synthetic route is a urea-based fertilizer. So what these are they're little pellets, and they're coated with this special coating that actually breaks down over time. So instead of having to fertilize once a week or something, it's getting for a good amount of fertilizer every time we water. I do want to know when we're fertilizing out here in Colorado, it's important to break up those with a clear watering in between. What can happen if we fertilize too often out here is, as the soil will dry down, there'll be a buildup of excess salts, and that can potentially be harmful to the plants. But an easy way to avoid that is just have a clear watering in between. And if you can fertilize your plants once a week, that's a good number to start at, and you can kind of see how the plants react to it. If they're growing happy and you think you can push them a little bit harder, I would say go for it, as long as you're not continuously fertilizing your plants. Just be careful with that out here, because it does get dry and it will have some negative effects on your plants. So in accordance with making this stuff easy, I wanted to talk about fertilizer mixing and injection. So to the right here, you see a little handheld fertilizer. You might have seen these for like the soil, but they can also be used for your garden. So what you're going to do is you'll take your fertilizer. It will need to be either a powdered form that can be turned into a solution or a liquid solution. And we're going to mix up a stock batch. So what the stock batch is a concentrate of our fertilizer. You can kind of think of it like the soda machines have the concentrate and they inject it in with the water and then you get your soda. Same sort of concept here. But what's great about this is we can mix up a stock solution, and then all we have to do to fertilize is top off that little tank. One thing I will say is the math on it is very important to get correct. If you guys ever have any questions about this, I'm more than happy to help you guys with the math and get you set up with that. It can be a little intimidating at times, but it will help you because it just makes things easy. And I found in the garden, if we kind of set ourselves up for success, that's really where we reap the rewards. So these are about $15 to $20. You could easily mix up all the fertilizer you're going to need for the summer and just store it in a garage or someplace. One note: when you mix up a stock solution, I recommend using warm water. And then just in case, a lot of people don't realize, if you're mixing up a gallon of stock fertilizer solution, you're not going to fill up that jug to a gallon mark and then add your fertilizer, because that will askew your concentration and you'll end up with lower numbers than you did the math for. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to add half your water, then add your fertilizer. Remember, the fertilizer will displace that volume. And then we're going to top it up to, if we're mixing 1 gallon, the 1 gallon mark. I do recommend using warm water. It will help dissolve the fertilizer quicker and make it an aqueous solution faster. Just one thing is, you obviously don't want to be putting hot fertilizer on a plant, because that won't end well. But it will help you mix it up. So just make sure you let it cool down to room temperature before it starts. And I definitely believe that something like this will really help just make fertilizing easy, because I know sometimes if we're mixing it up by hand, the first 5 times are okay, but after that, it kind of gets tedious. So this will help alleviate that. So going on back to watering, the best time of day to watering in the commercial setting, we always aim to have our watering done by 10 a.m. This allows us to make sure that we see the crop before it gets too hot out, and we avoid leaving fertilizer or water droplets on the plant. Fertilizer especially will act as a magnifying glass and do damage to your plants. Not so much in like the May sun, but once we get out later into the season, those hot afternoon days can definitely do some damage to the plants. The other thing we want to avoid is watering right before we go to sleep or it gets dark out. I know this isn't always preventable, but we want to avoid creating that damp microclimate that's going to help the fungus and the pests that we don't want. Those are going to thrive in that environment. So if we can avoid creating that environment, we're better off doing that. And lastly, by giving the plant water early in the day, we avoid creating any heat-related stress or stress due to it not having enough water because it already has this resource to get to. Coming back to containers, I definitely recommend checking the weights of it. We also talked last time about it's a silica-based gel that you can add prior to putting your transplants in the pot, and that will help with your water holding capacity. If you're interested in that, just look at the previous one. But these are just a couple of basic tips to kind of help you with success. And I definitely would push the checking the weights pot, because that's how you can do it quickly and confidently. Not knowing, some plants like to fake and will kind of, oh, I'm wilting, and you check the water in the pot, and I'm not really entirely sure about that. So that's why I like checking the weights on the pot, because it will alleviate that variable. Going on to other forms, if you want to automate a little bit more, soaker hoses or drip irrigation are a great way to kind of automate that, and you can just hit a button and hey, we're watering. It does take a little bit of effort up front, but I do feel that it's definitely worth that initial effort, because it'll make the task of watering easier. If you do a soaker hose, I would definitely recommend brass quick connects. That's going to make the attaching of the hose, instead of having to thread it every time and I forgot the gasket or anything like that. It's a real quick in and out, and the brass ones will definitely outlast plastic ones. So just if you're going to invest in it, I definitely would recommend the brass ones. And they're about $10 a pair roughly, and they'll last decades. I did also want to talk about, since we're talking about sub-irrigation, automation. So there's an automated irrigation controller. The industry standard is called a Rainbird. They've come a long ways since I started to use them. When I started using them, they had like little pegs, like an old school timer. And now they're all controlled via smartphone. So setting the schedule is really easy. I'm sure it will send you alerts. It's definitely something to consider. I know we typically think about automated irrigations for lawns, but it can also be for your garden with a couple of easily to install valves. The other thing I did want to point out, when I was looking into these, there are rebate programs around Colorado. Depending on what municipality you live on, you might be able to get one for a very small cost. So we will be posting this presentation online, and I've included those links. I have the Louisville and Erie rebate controller program, but there's also stuff for the Denver water area, and I think some other municipalities, but definitely check with this list. It's not all encompassing, but it's definitely a good start. And the rebates are, I think, pretty good, and considering the value that you get. This could kind of, be the difference between having to get up early on a Saturday morning to water your garden, or being able to sleep in and knowing, hey, it's on a timer and it's going to take care of itself. So definitely something to consider when we're talking about watering. So we're going to switch gears a little bit here and start talking about bugs. So I can't really talk about bugs without first talking about a pollinator garden. So I do think that a pollinator garden is really important for your plants. And when I say a pollinator garden, it doesn't have to be a full-fledged garden. In my greenhouse, you'll see on the bottom right here, that's sweet alyssum. I grow it from seed. It grows very fast. And the one thing about it is, since the flowers are really tiny, it's accessible to a broad range of bugs. The other thing that's great about sweet alyssum is it's continuously flowering. So there's always a source of pollen in here. I know with pollinator gardens, it can kind of be like, I have this flower blooming from, the end of May to the mid-June, and then the other one flowering. And that can kind of get like a little like, so if you just want an easier one, just get some sweet alyssum. I really like putting them in hanging baskets, because then they're at eye level and I can give them a haircut really quick. It makes the maintenance of it a lot easier. So if you're looking for an easy pollinator garden, just stick with sweet alyssum. So going into the good bugs. So there's a lot that encompasses a bio program. The one that I run here, it's really taken me a long time to really figure out how the bugs work, and it's not the easiest or the cheapest method, but I did want to talk about what I use, because I know some people they go kind of, oh, you're using those. So when we're talking about good bugs, we're talking about creating an ecosystem in which those bugs thrive. So when we're running a biosystem, it's important to know that I'm okay with having some level of bad bugs in here at all time. And that's because I need a food source for these bugs. So when we deplete them, we end up crashing our population. And I do weekly releases, so we try to build on a population, and giving them that food source is important. So it's always kind of a just a balancing act of your predators and prey. So a lot of people will, actually, I do want to note that I don't have a slide for this, but I did want to speak briefly about spider mites. So spider mites are out here in Colorado, we know this. They are very difficult to control. I struggle to control them, and it's often because by the time we notice the infestation, it's gotten to a stage where our good bugs are not going to be able to put a dent in that population. They'll go after them, but we're always going to still have this high population. And that's one of the things with a bio program, is it's really all about prevention and making sure that when those mites show up at my doorstep, that I have predators waiting for them. So you can kind of see the mentality of running a bio program is more preventative, in the fact that I know I'm going to get pests than a curative solution. And that's one of the reasons why I think you can kind of avoid all of this stuff just by having a good pollinator garden. So talking about bugs, we want to talk about scouting too. So I scout in the greenhouse weekly. And what I'm doing is I'm just flipping leaves. I'm looking for bugs in all the nooks and crannies. And one tool that really helps me are our hand lenses. So you see on the bottom right here, this is all I use. It's a $10 hand lens on Amazon, and it's really going to aid you in identifying your pests. So when I talk about pest identification, when you say I have an aphid, there are differences in the ways that I can attack an aphid. If it's a potato aphid, if it's a green peach aphid, if it's a rue aphid. So being able to look at those bugs, or either take a picture that is of quality that someone can key out or figure out what species you have, will aid you in getting it. So for example, if I had an aphid, so a green peach aphid, one of their defense mechanisms is that they will just drop from the plant when the plant is disturbed. A potato aphid, it has that drop response, but it's more likely to just stay put or run away. But knowing that if you had a green peach aphid, for example, you can just take a hose early in the morning and just kind of use that to jostle the plants, and the aphids themselves will drop off. But we won't really be able to know this if we didn't know what species we're dealing with. So again, most of us have smartphones these days. So, taking a picture of good quality is something to consider too. And I'll show you some pictures that I took with my phone and hand lens kind of together so you can see the quality that you'll get. So talking about good bugs, can't talk about good bugs without ladybugs, right? So there's about 80 species that have made Colorado their home. But most of the bugs that you will buy at a nursery are from California, and they're of the convergence species. So these aren't necessarily the predominant killers that we have out in Colorado. Naturally, these ladybugs have a wide range. And one of the reasons that I really don't push for ladybug releases is they have wings and have a tendency to fly away once they're dispersed. The other thing to note is that when ladybugs are, the wild ones are caught, they're contained in that container, and it's generally, they're given some food source, but they're generally without a natural food source for a few weeks. So what happens then is the bugs will, their metabolism kind of reverts. They're going to say, okay, we're not really eating, and it's going to take them time once they get released to trigger that eating response. So even when you release it, you might not be getting the control that you're thinking of. And I think, I just feel like if you're paying for something and they can potentially all fly away as soon as you release them, you're not really doing yourself a favor. The bottom picture is a ladybug larva. Those would be a great option, but they're not really farmed in quantities that are available to the public. But I just wanted to share a couple pictures with you. This is in the greenhouse. We were growing thyme. So this is a native ladybug, just kind of hanging out and munching on some aphids. And then this is what a local, this was found right here in the greenhouse, a local ladybug larva looks like. So if you see, they look kind of like something out of Alien vs. Predator, not gonna lie. But if you see the orange spots, that's the telltale sign that you're looking at a ladybug larva. So now I want to move on to my favorite bug. These are lacewings. So the top is an adult lacewing, and then the bottom picture is a larva. And we're going to talk a lot about the larva. So I am all about lacewing larvae. They are ferocious. They will eat anything that fits in their mouth, including their brothers and sisters. So you generally only see lacewings offered in about quantities of like 100 to 1,000, just because they can't ship them that quick, because you'll lose a good amount. As far as cost, it costs about $15 to $20 a bottle. Just know when you get into these biologicals, most of them are shipped overnight. So you will need to deal with the overnight shipping costs. I've seen times where I've spent more on shipping than bugs. So just be aware if you want to, team up with some people and buy a couple bugs together. I get mine through a company called Tip Top Bio. And I get them through Acme Hydroponics, which is located out in Broomfield. So if you're looking for bugs, you can either go to the website that will be linked as well here at the end, or you can just call up the guys at Acme Hydroponics, and they'll be happy to take care of you. They're great people there. So this is a picture of one of the lacewings that I found in the strawberries. Just kind of a cool little creature, but this one was about 5 times as big as when I released it. So I know they're up to no good, and they're eating those aphids. So I really do love lacewings. They're ferocious, and I would say if you release them in your garden and you see adult lacewings, that's the greatest kind of success you can have when it comes, because that means you're going full cycle and hopefully creating an ecosystem in which the lacewings are part of that. So here's another picture. This is with a hand lens, so you can see it's a little bit more detailed. But if someone were to be able to provide a picture to me, like, hey, what's this bug? This is definitely the kind of a resolution where I can say, hey, that's a lacewing larva, or it'll kind of help you just get a higher quality image, and hopefully help you identify down to species what pest you have. So kind of a cool thing to have. This isn't one that I expect anyone to really incorporate into their garden, but this is also probably top 2 favorite bugs. So this is called an Ophidius urvi, and it's a parasitic wasp. And we actually have some parasitic wasps that naturally live in Colorado. But what's really cool about this predator is what it does to its prey. So primarily these go after aphids, and what's cool about these guys is they'll inject their eggs into an adult aphid. The pupae will pupate inside the aphid, and then I'll get another predator at the end. So we lose a pest and we gain a predator. What more can you ask for, right? Just one thing about them is there are parasites that parasitize the parasites. So they're called hyperparasites. And the way that you can, well, I'll explain a little bit more. So the picture you see on the bottom right is an aphid that has been parasitized, and you can actually see the adult that's inside the aphid. I think I've only seen this a couple times. It's pretty cool. You can see like that's what it does. So it will emerge from there in a short period of time, and it will leave the husk of the aphid, and we call those mummies. So it's not uncommon if you see kind of like a petrified aphid, that's what happens to that poor aphid. As far as coming back to the parasites, we can tell if there are hyperparasites around by looking at the emergence hole. So if the emergence hole is smooth and round, we know that there was no hyperparasite. That's what it should look for. But if it looks like if it was jagged and ripped, that's how we know we have hyperparasites. And at that point, I would probably stop releasing these guys because they're just food for someone else now. But definitely a cool predator, and these guys will benefit from having that pollinator garden or having some sort of pollen around, or it's really just also a place for them to kind of relax and get away from the crops and everything. They want to relax too. I did also want to talk about cultural controls. So when we're talking about pests, a lot of people think of chemical and biological controls. There's also another class called cultural controls. And that's really just growing something that might be a little different or is not as susceptible to a pest that we know. So for example, downy mildew, powdery mildew, we get these, right? We can actually find seed varieties that are not necessarily genetically modified. These are all grown through traditional breeding programs, but have a built-up resistance to that. So if you tuned into our last one, you might have noticed I was kind of a Johnny's seed. I was pushing that company a little bit, but one of the reasons I really like that company is they offer the same level of seeds with the genetic resistance and the basically it's a commercial level distributor that everybody can access. So I really like the fact that those resistant varieties are also available to the consumer. So it is just something to think about. If you get powdery mildew every year on your basil, maybe look for a basil that has some disease resistance in, and we can avoid it. And that's kind of coming back to oftentimes the simplest changes reap the most reward. So if we're not growing that plant that's going to have that problem, we're not going to have that problem. And we set ourselves up for success. So definitely spend some time looking through the seed catalog if you have certain pest problems. So these will be the links. I have some links to the a lot of the Colorado Native Plant Society, but I also want to provide a list of native plants. So if you are interested in starting a pollinator garden, native plants are going to require the least amount of water, and they're going to be probably the most successful in this environment. So I didn't have time to go over all of them, but included in there are also a list of retailers where you can actually go and get these plants. So I'll provide that with the posted PowerPoint. So now that's all I had for watering and bugs. So I'm open to all questions that you may have regarding plants. So fire away.
Thanks, Alex. I just have to say your excitement is amazing. I just love how much excitement that you have for this, and we're so lucky to have you on campus. We had quite a few questions that came in during your presentation, so I'm just going to go down the list of them, and then we'll get to the questions that are coming in right now. So early on, someone asked if there was a CU seed exchange or a plant swap group that you know about.
Not to my knowledge, but that would be a good thing, I think, to have. I can definitely look into that.
Great. Let's see. So you had mentioned fertilizing once a week. How big of a plant would that be for? Like if you do house plants and you're using a fertilizer that recommends once a month, is that enough? Does it depend on your
I fertilize my house plants once a week. I use a 20-20-20 at the recommended amount, and everyone seems to like it. I definitely wouldn't recommend like that strength for a cactus or something like a succulent, but the 20-20-20 fertilizer once a week, houseplants, go for it.
Great. You were talking about pollinator plants. So can you tell us, do you have to replant those every spring?
So yes and no, depending on if you go with an annual or a perennial. With a sweet alyssum, that's an annual, so you are going to have to plant that every year. But one of the things, you know, a perennial native garden, you're not going to have to plant every year. And that's one of the reasons why I think a perennial garden, if you're going to do the effort to actually make a garden, would be the way to go, just because you're not going to have to replant that every year. It's going to come back. So that's definitely what I would recommend.
Great. What recommendations do you have for planting in a really windy area, say like Byers, Colorado?
Sure, yeah. Wind whip is definitely a factor out here. The greenhouse is 30 feet up, so I deal with quite a bit of wind myself. One thing we could do is put in like a windbreak. So it could either be, you could put a physical barrier in front of your plants. I would say probably 10 feet away. You know, you don't want to put it too close where it's going to shade anything out, but you also want to provide some sort of a break from the wind. So either some sort of like a snow fence type deal, or if you want to go with a hedge, a lot of people will plant some sort of a hedge around the perimeter, and that will grow up. And as it grows, you'll get more and more wind protection. So that's also something to consider.
Great. Someone else mentioned that they have very red spider mite looking guests that seem to be hanging around flower beds, mostly by the rose bushes. Do you know what those are? Are they good? Are they bad?
I think I know what you're talking about. They're the super small red ones. I've seen them around. I'm not too familiar with controls on them. Like I said, mites of any species are really difficult to control, and really without reaching for a chemical, if you see those webbings and nets, it's oftentimes too late to really put, like, there are controls, but you're not going to put a dent in it, kind of thing. So the biological controls are called Swarovski mites. They're fairly inexpensive, and you can actually create breeder piles, or they actually will sell what are called breeder packets. So it is something where it's not as expensive in you know, the grand scheme of biological controls, but it is you know, it is a preventative measure versus I feel like when you see those, you're looking for a curative measure.
Great. Someone else mentioned that every July, their vine plants like cucumber or pumpkin, they burn with the intense Colorado sun and heat, even with daily watering. Do you have any suggestions on how to grow these successfully?
Sure. Yeah. One thing, in the last episode, we talked about ground covers. So a Rime or a DuPont fabric. It's basically a really light, you can think of it as like a bed sheet. But there are ways that you could put that over your crop to provide a little bit of extra shade. Now, you wouldn't want to enclose it with this blanket because that's going to raise the temperature. But if you left the sides floating, that will give it, that will cut down on the transmission of light that's getting to the plant, which should help you. It sounds like you're just getting too much sun because that's a really sunny time of year. So, and the cool thing about that is if you get that Rime, you can kind of, you know, it has more than one purpose, right? So we can use it to shade our plant. We can use it for hail protection. We can use it to extend our season a little bit. So there are definitely multiple ways to use the same tool.
Interesting. The next one is about a pest. So they said that they had flea beetles last year. Do you know if the lacewings will eat flea beetles?
You know, they do eat anything that will fit in their mouth. So I think depending on the size of the beetle, they would provide a degree of control. Yeah. The key I do want to drive home is you do need, if you're going to be releasing them, try to be proactive with it, because it's not when we release the bugs, I don't expect them to eat things right away. It's going to take them a little while to move into the crop to find the bugs. So you do want to either go into it with a proactive mindset or have kind of some other way of dealing with the pest. It would definitely be worth it. I don't know of any literature that would like back that up, but they eat each other, so I think they would. I think they'd eat it. I'd say go for it.
So fascinating. Someone mentioned, in case people aren't watching the chat, someone mentioned that the Longmont Public Library has a seed library. So if you're interested in that, check out the Longmont Public Library. And Alex, I think that's actually all the questions that we have, unless anybody else has anything that they haven't put into the chat yet.
Awesome.
Yeah, great. Just a reminder, we will be posting the recording of this to our website. So if you get into your gardening and you're like, oh my gosh, I thought Alex said something about this, you can always look it up and rewatch it. We will also post a link to his presentation on our website as well. So you can link to the resources that he provided, and you can also see his contact information in there as well. There was one more question about how to know when it's time to repot a house plant.
Ooh, good question. So I've had a theory and I've been testing it for the past couple of years. So when you see the roots hit the bottom, transplant it. You'll be good. That's kind of how, and I'm not talking about like circling the pot or anything. Like as soon as you see those roots hit the bottom, you're good to go to transplant. And that's pretty much any size plant. And I definitely believe that.
Wow. I think I need to repot almost all of my houseplants then.
Well, so it's not that you have to, but you can't at that point.
Great. Someone asked what you are growing in your personal garden, not the CU garden this year.
So I'm going to do some cool beans. They have I found some really cool, pretty like scarlet variegated beans. And I live in an apartment, so I'm going to be doing a container gardening, but the plan is to have the beans trellis up the side of my patio kind of thing. So I'm excited for that. And I like beans. Who doesn't like beans?
So true. Someone asked where we were going to post this information. It will be on the Boulder Campus Staff Council Outreach Committee website. I just posted it to the chat. Vanessa asked if we can do a apartment gardening speaker series in the future.
Sure.
We'll have to chat with Alex about that. That would be fun. I think that's all we have, Alex.
Cool. Well, thank you everyone for joining me. I hope you learned something. And, like I said, I'm just out here in my greenhouse. So if you have questions, you got my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me with any plant questions you have, because I'm all about helping people. So thank you so much for joining, and I hope you guys have a great growing season.
Thanks, Alex.